thank you for joining us today. I'm Bob Continetti, Senior Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, and I'll be your moderator for today's Faculty and Research Town Hall. Once again, we have brought together a group of panelists to provide updates on the continuing evolution of our operations during the COVID-19 pandemic and to answer your questions. As we are all aware, the pandemic continues to provide new and unexpected challenges for us. In the face of these challenges, these town halls have played an essential role in keeping us united as a community. So I thank you for joining us today. Some questions were submitted during registration. However, please feel free to use the Q&A window to submit additional questions for our panelists during today's town hall. Due to our time limitations, we might not be able to get to all of your questions, but we will log the questions as they come in and post answers on the Return to Learn website with a link that's now being pasted into the chat. Today's webinar has live closed captioning available in two ways. First, you can click on the closed caption button at the bottom of the screen and select Show Subtitles, or you can also click on the link that is pasted now into the chat. And now I'd like to introduce our co-host for today's town hall, Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, Elizabeth Simmons, for some welcoming remarks. EVC Simmons.
Thanks very much, SAVC Continetti. It's great to be with you all again. And I spent some time walking around campus today and over the last couple of weeks. And it's really been marvelous to see the change, to have so many students on campus, walking around in the classroom in person and just bringing the campus back to life. I've also enjoyed seeing a number of you at various campus gatherings and events that have taken place as the spring quarter has gotten started. And I'm even getting to teach an in-person class of my own now. And it's such a delight to be in the classroom with the students and working with them in person again. So I hope that we will continue to be in a period where the pandemic is having a much lower degree of everyday impact on our lives, and that we'll be able to continue to enjoy the benefits of working together in person day in and day out. And since I know that we have a rather full agenda, I'll stop with expressing that hope. And again, my delight at being here with you, and pass the mic back to our moderator, Bob.
Thank you, EVC Simmons. Next, we will have welcoming remarks from our other co-host today, Vice Chancellor for Research, Corinne Peak-Asa. Vice Chancellor.
Thank you. So in the spirit of being able to engage in activities we haven't done in quite a while, I was able to do my first visits to the federal legislation delegation with Natalie Alpert, Executive Director of Federal Relations, who you'll hear from in a little bit. And I bring it up in this town hall for a couple reasons. There were two things that were very notable. And the first Federal Hill visits I've done as the UC San Diego Vice Chancellor for Research, and the first visits I've done now in 2 years since I've been to inside the Capitol. And the two things I want to comment on are, first, it was truly super fun to be able to talk about what we do here at UC San Diego to our federal delegation. It was wonderful just because there were so many stories to share about the research that we do broadly across campus, but how well received those were by the staff and the legislators who were meeting with us. So I do think there is huge appreciation for the role that our campus has in advancing knowledge, discovery, creativity. And the second thing I want to note is that as I've walked around campus and compare that to walking around inside the Capitol, we have a far higher proportion of people voluntarily wearing masks to activities than I think Natalie and I noticed in the Capitol. So that, I think, is also a reminder of what an amazing national leader UC San Diego has been throughout the COVID pandemic. So I think that we deserve a great big pat on the back for the work that we do and for our reputation for that work that we do. And with that, I will turn it back so we can launch into some details about that work.
All right, thank you, Vice Chancellor Peak-Asa. I would now like to introduce our first presenter today, Dr. Chip Schooley, Professor of Medicine, and he will give us one of his updates on the continuing evolution of the pandemic and its impact on campus health and safety. Dr. Schooley.
Thanks very much, Cdc Continuity, and it's great to be back with everyone today as more of us are on campus with every passing day. I'm going to spend the next few minutes giving people a little bit of an overview about where things are going globally and here in the US, and more particularly here in San Diego, and what we expect will be happening over the course of the next few months. I think everyone has been watching the improvement in the COVID pandemic in the US. In the orange line, you can see we've kind of hit a nadir over the course of the last month and have been relatively stable with a couple of exceptions I'll get to in a minute. In contrast to the situation in Europe, where they initially came down from the Omicron surge that predated ours by several weeks, and then hung up about halfway down to what I think they had hoped would be a nadir like ours. Their hang up occurred when a new strain of Omicron, BA2, began to pop from country to country. It would go through each country quickly and then move on to another. But in the aggregate, Europe as a whole has stayed up and hasn't yet returned to a baseline state. Next. When one looks at California, we are doing very much like the rest of the US. You can see we have dropped down to a nadir that's lower than we've had really since last summer, and have been experiencing opportunity to do a lot more than we have in the past. Next. At a national level, this is the new CDC grading system that takes into account severity of cases in addition to the number of cases and the impact of the healthcare system to look at a county level risk factor. And this is the map as of March the 10th, and you can see a lot of green throughout the country. And next. The map most recently from April 6th, you can see the greening has continued. So as a whole in the US, things have really continued to improve. And for the most part, most counties in the US are in the lowest tier. Next. What we're looking at, however, is the Northeast. The Northeast is the part of the US that has generally seen early indications of new surges. It generally has followed what has gone on in Europe. And as I mentioned, Europe is having a BA2 surge. And what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 weeks is a gradual rise of cases in the US. It has not been precipitous, certainly not as precipitous as the rise in the original Omicron spike in December. But you can see the case rate in the Northeast is about twice what it is in the rest of the country, with an upward inflection that we're watching very carefully. Next. In San Diego, however, things really continue to look quite good. You can see our case rates are down in the 200 range, 250 range. Hospitalizations continue to decline, and the testing positivity rate in the county is quite low as well. So locally, things really are right now quite quiet. Next. Our students came back from the spring break in really good shape. We had estimated that they would come back with a positivity rate of about 1%. And that's very much how it came back to us, a 1% positivity rate as anticipated, 0.8% for the students on campus and 1.4% off campus. We only had about a third of the students tested, but next. When we looked at the campus wastewater, you can see it declined and throughout this whole period of time. So we don't think that many cases were missed just because of the low testing rate. The campus residential wastewater is really quite green. And the places we do see a positive signal have been cases where, for the most part, a positive case has been found. Next. Looking at what's been going on campus, you can see since spring break, things have continued to decline. We had one case yesterday, and you can see that with new cases. And when you look at the situation for employees and faculty, you can see again on campus very low case rates ranging from 0 to 7 over the last month. So the COVID temperature is really quite low right now. Next. We use, as everyone knows, Point Loma wastewater as a way to try to understand what the overall community rate is. It was a very good indicator that we were about to have a new surge in early December. Rob Knight and his group called that out and let us know that things looked like we were about to head to a peak, and that's indeed what happened. Since the Omicron peak in blue, you can see things have declined. And what you can see is that the wastewater declined to a level of about 930,000 about a month ago. And it's since that time been bouncing around a level of about 2 million with not really much of an upward trend once it hit the plateau of about 2 million. And we're again going to continue to watch this very carefully to try to get an idea about whether or not the early activity of BA2 on the East Coast is beginning to come to San Diego. Next slide. In the Point Loma wastewater, you can also see monitoring the variants. The light blue in the center of the slide was the little peak of the original Omicron variant that began this most recent peak on the roller coaster. That was quickly replaced by an updated version of Omicron BA 1.1 that caused the major part of the surge in mid-January. And you can see that has really steadily declined. And now just that little fringe that you see at the bottom, the darker blue along the line that along the downslope that began about February 20th is BA2. BA2 accounts for probably 80% of the cases in San Diego County. But as you can see, it's 80% of a much smaller number of cases than earlier. But we're going to watch this carefully to see what direction things are going. Next. As to vaccination, we've continued to have very good uptake of vaccination by the students. You can see that student compliance with the booster mandate that's in place is in the range of about 95%. We are at a level close to that for health science employees, not quite there with campus employees, but some of this reflects a deferral of the need for a third vaccination in people who recently recovered from Omicron. But overall, people have been doing quite well with the boosting. Now, where are we? Next slide. With the vaccine mandate. The current mandate is that for students, faculty, and staff, everyone is asked to have an initial vaccine series, plus a booster if you're eligible, or an approved exemption. And those were the figures I showed you just a minute ago. That's kind of where we are, 95% with the students, for example. About a week and a half ago, a second booster was authorized by the FDA, and the wording was those over 50 may receive a second booster. This is not currently part of the mandate, but it is something that has been made available to people over the age of 50. It's been available for some time for people who are immunocompromised or have underlying immune deficiencies of any kind. But this new allowance for people who are 4 months out and over 50 is a new event. Next. The reason this was offered, these are data published in the New England Journal of Medicine about a week ago, showing you the adjusted rate ratio. In other words, how much better do people with 4 vaccinations do than people with 3 over the age of 60? These are these are data from Israel, and you can see that while in blue, about 3 weeks out, people who received the 4th vaccine dose have about twice as few, have half the number of infections, and this begins to wane over the next several weeks. You can see that there is a greater decrease in illness requiring hospitalization or death. And you can see that this continues to increase after that. So while the press has been talking about modest protection for a short time, they're really talking about protection from infection. But protection from illness in the vulnerable population over 60 continues after that time and is in the range of a ratio of 4 to 1. Next slide, and then last slide. It's just a continuation of that, not in the New England Journal, but published by the Israeli Ministry of Health, a continuation out to week 9. Confidence intervals are still relatively wide most recently because the number of people reaching that time point aren't that great. But in general, we're seeing 3 to 4-fold benefit in terms of preventing illness in people receiving the 4th vaccine dose over the age of 60. So I will stop here and we'll turn things back over to SVC Continetti.
Thank you, Dr. Schooley. Next, we will hear about the renaming of discipline-based and cross-cutting academic units on campus from EVC Simmons. EVC Simmons.
Thanks very much. I think, okay, here we go. Here comes the slides. I just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of what's happened. Basically on general campus and within academic affairs, we had a mix of things named as schools and as divisions without much rhyme or reason. And so working with the Academic Senate and ultimately the Office of the President, we've renamed what used to be divisions of biological sciences, social sciences, physical sciences, and arts and humanities to be schools, just like all of the other discipline-based organizations on campus, like the School of Public Health, the School of Engineering, the School of Marine Science, and so on. So now we have consistency there. It's just a renaming. Doesn't change anything about the curriculum, about who supervises whom, really just a name for greater clarity. And similarly, we renamed the cross-cutting units that serve multiple student populations across all of the disciplines to be called divisions. If you go to the next slide, you'll see what's happened. So you can see the 4 renamings down below that I just mentioned. Things that used to be called divisions are now schools in parallel with all of their cousins around campus. And then you can see up top, what used to be the Office of Undergraduate Education is now Division of Undergraduate Education. For graduate education, they now incorporate postdoctoral affairs as well. So that division has now a more precise name reflecting their mission. And similarly, extension is now our Division of Extended Studies. So hope this will make it a bit clearer for people on campus and off campus to just understand what the names of the units mean. And it really is just a renaming. Thanks for the chance to make a mention of this, Bob.
Well, thank you, EVC Simmons. Now we're going to hear some updates about our operations during the upcoming summer from Dean of Undergraduate Education, John Moore, Associate Vice Chancellor for Educational Innovation, Carlos Jensen, and Director of Summer Programs, Rocco Fragomeni.
So yes, summer session is coming soon. We started enrollment this past Monday, and we have 850 total courses that are being offered. Because the Senate suspended the policy on distance education courses for the summer, faculty had the opportunity to offer their summer courses remotely, and 350 are now scheduled to be remote. That's about 41% of the summer courses. As you may know, over the past 2 years with remote offerings, our summer enrollment has increased substantially, about 50% for both the past 2 summers. And so we're hoping that this remote option will also allow us to have larger students enrolling in summer sessions. So students who may go home for summer and in pre-pandemic times would have perhaps taken a course in a local community college or a local UC or other university can now go home and they can participate in the remote instruction. One of the more significant changes that's happening this summer that will affect some small number of classes, but nevertheless several classes, is that we're discontinuing the contingent agreement on summer session compensation. So it used to be that if enrollment fell below 15 students, then the compensation for the instructor would be prorated and would also go down. So so this was a way to make sure that we didn't offer courses that were too small, and it provided an incentive for creating the courses and having significant enrollments, or at least enrollments higher than 15. That's not going to happen anymore now. If the enrollment falls between 15, the instructor will still be compensated at the full 8.5% of their salary. And However, the department will be contacted to explore options. So the department might decide they think the course is too small to move forward. Or it could be that the courses will go ahead, and then the department can decide whether they want to offer that same course in the future. And if so, how to improve enrollments. And essentially, departments will have two opportunities to get the enrollments up above 15. If that's not successful, then that course won't be offered in the future. But the instructor won't be on the hook for having a reduced salary as a consequence of low enrollments. So that's pretty much some of what's going on with summer, and turn it back to AVC Continetti.
I'll step in.
Yeah, Carlos.
All right. So as Dean Moore indicated, we have a robust program when it comes to summer classes, and we're also very excited to welcome back other summer programs to a degree that we haven't been able to do over the last 2 years. We have the largest summer bridge program that we have. Cosmos is coming back. Other programs are starting up. The goal for this summer is to come back cautiously and make sure that we've got backup plans and that we can keep everyone safe if the situation turns. But we're also trying to find ways of providing support to our faculty and staff as they're looking to restart summer programs after 2 years, and figure out how we can help everyone do better and do more. So over the next weeks, there will be conversations about the planning for summer of 23 and the kind of support and the kind of infrastructure that we can put in place to make it easier and to put together summer programs. One thing that you should have all seen in your email, hopefully it didn't get buried, there was a call to register the summer programs that are taking place this summer, as well as any REUs that you're planning to bring to campus. And part of this is to make sure that we can provide the support as you're looking to onboard, as you're looking to find housing, get students into the IT system, etc. And part of this is for safety, so that we can, if we need to restrict access or we need to do something to keep everyone safe, we know who is around. The guidance was issued on March 31st, and the deadline for registering or for getting in touch with our office to let us know that you're having an REU or a summer program is coming up on April 21st. This is not very different from what we did last year, but just a continuation of that practice. And to talk a little bit more about that, I'd invite Director Fragamini to take over.
Great. Thank you, ABC Jensen. So as Carlos mentioned, specifically for REUs, there are going to be 2 pathways this year, similar to summer of 2021. REU programs were permitted to take place if they were longer than 7 weeks. This year, that has been reduced back to 5 weeks or longer. And the main benefit here is that participants in these REUs 5 weeks or longer will have their students or their participants registered into campus systems, given campus affiliate access essentially to meet the different guidelines and requirements listed within the MOU that's required for this coming year. REUs that are less than 5 weeks will also be permitted to take place. They will also need to sign that MOU, but unlike REUs that are 5 weeks or longer, we'll need to organize for those different administrative responsibilities independently of campus affiliate access. Next slide, please. So regardless of length, of course, again, the MOU is going to be required. As ABC Jensen mentioned, there is a form that we have. There's actually a link that was just dropped in the chat for where to find that if you did get buried in your email. It's very quick to fill out, just asks for some basic information, helps support also ITS in getting campus affiliate access for those REUs that are eligible, and it will signal to us to send the MOU out once that has been finalized. Some other considerations to keep in mind, of course, COVID protocols are subject to change, and we're waiting for final guidance on what that will be for this coming summer, and look forward to sharing that once we have it available. And for those of you who do need REU housing, it is not available for minors, but please reach out to HDH as soon as possible. Meetings at ucsd.edu is the best contact for them. But outside of REUs as well, they're happy to speak with you about other opportunities you may be looking for. And with that, I will pass it back to Senior ABC Continetti.
All right, thank you, Dean Moore, ABC Jensen, and Director Fragomeni. Now we will hear from our Associate Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management, Jim Rawlins, about the admissions methodology and updates for our Fall 22 admissions cycle. Jim.
Thanks very much, Bob, and good afternoon, everyone. A few updates that relate to this time of year, and while this is always of interest to the whole campus, if you happen to be one of our viewers today that has one of the students we're talking about here, hang in there. Not only have you been watching them go through this process, but they're watching you go through this process as parents or family. It's a big thing for us to remember all the impact of what we do here on all these students that are taking interest in us. And I think everyone's aware of this, but if you aren't, you should be aware that UC San Diego gets more applications than almost any other institution on the face of the earth. We've got a lot to be proud of in that regard. This year is another record for us in having over 131,000 first-year applicants, as well as nearly 20,000 transfer applicants. So over 150,000 students seeking to be part of the Fall 22 undergraduate new students on this campus. For those of you that take an interest in how this lines up with what's going on around the rest of the UC campuses, we're even providing a link here in the chat that lets you see some of the recently, sorry, I'm still getting used to all the things that are confidential around here. The UC shares those data on a very careful basis, and you can see the application data for all those other campuses at the link we've provided. Going on to the next slide, to let you know some of the many things we take into account in trying to handle this massive application volume, and the fact that our staff and external readers are giving very close looks at a very quick pace to all of these students' work. We've got always as our goal to identify and admit students that really show the potential to be successful here through the things they've done and what we think they'll do next. They need to be able to show that they're ready for the challenge through the achievement they've presented before, and also some of the really neat personal attributes they bring to the class. That could be about diversity of the abilities, personal experiences and backgrounds that we review through looking at multiple factors, 13 in fact, that have been approved by faculty in our holistic review process. All of that work's done to very carefully try to attend to many, many different factors in how we shape the class, both for the first year group and the transfer group. And that transfer group, with especially us looking at California community colleges, we want to be very much sure that those students are ready for the major they have selected, because that is what they need to be down to at this time. On the last slide, I'll just walk you through a few other last things that again assure you that we are trying very hard to make sure that our predictions of what all these students will do keeps us within our bounds and our limits for the enrollment capacity of the campus. A basic way of helping you understand what we do to look at historical data is that we look kind of like you would at a hurricane map at a distance of what's the highest and lowest outcomes we've expected to see over the last few years. And this year in particular, we're making sure we've made offers of admissions with an assumption that the highest possible outcome in terms of the percentage of students who accept our offer, or what we call yield, will still put us in a place where we can really become in right-sized for the size of that incoming class. This is one of the reasons we're using a much bigger wait list than usual this year. And essentially what that means is that as much as we want to bring some conclusion for this to the students, we're letting them know that some things about their time simply will have to wait until we hear about the offers we've already made. This will take us into May and possibly June to wrap up those offers and conclude the class. Thanks, and back over to you, Bob.
Thank you for that update, ABC Rawlins. Next, we will hear about research ramp-up updates from Senior Associate Vice Chancellor for Research, Miroslav Krstić. Miroslav.
Thank you, SABC Continetti. Just three minor reminders. First, it is only for research activities that occur in the clinical facilities that the pandemic-related restrictions continue. That means that only in clinical facilities the masks remain required, whereas everywhere else the masking is optional. though it is strongly encouraged. The restrictions on the requirement to work on site are also lifted. In other words, the supervisors may now require their reports to work on site. Those who have concerns regarding the work on site are encouraged to wear a mask to protect themselves. And the options in the last bullet are available for everybody who needs medical accommodations, for example, through the Office of Disability Counseling and Consulting for faculty and staff, or the Office for Students with Disabilities for Students. And we continue to update the Research Ramp-Up website, which will continue to be a source of information, the latest information on the research-related policies. Back to you, Dr. Continetti.
Thank you, Senior AVC Kirsich. Now we will hear from our final presenter today, our Executive Director of Government Research Relations, Natalie Alpert, and she'll tell us about federal research funding opportunities. Natalie.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. I'll jump right into an update on federal research funding for FY22. So after nearly 6 months of delay, Congress finally passed a $1.5 trillion omnibus spending bill to fund the federal government through September. As you can see on the slide, most federal agencies did receive increased funding, though these numbers are probably not quite as generous as we originally hoped they would be. Still, it's good news. I want to point out a 7.5% increase to the National Endowment for the Humanities and robust increases to NIH and NSF, DoD research funding, including a 10.5% increase to DARPA. So I think the big point to emphasize here is that the federal fiscal year is already half over. And these agencies are really going to struggle to get this funding out the door before their deadline of September 30th. So please watch for RFAs that should really be gearing up shortly, and apply accordingly. I also want to mention 2 new sources of funding specifically. First is ARPA-H, which is based on the DARPA high-risk, high-reward model with the goal of fostering faster developments of novel treatments, diagnostics, and cures to improve health. This new agency received $1 billion in the omnibus spending bill, and as an initial investment that needs to be used over the next 3 years. So there's some time, there's a longer time horizon on that funding. So we're following this very closely, and we'll keep you updated as more details emerge about when funding will start to be available and how the kind of application process will go. I also want to mention the new NSF Technology Innovation and Partnership Directorate, or the TIP Directorate. Congress approved of NSF's request to establish the TIP Directorate, but did not provide any specific funding for it in FY22. The NSF director's vision for the new directorate is to enhance use-inspired, challenge-driven, translational research that addresses major scientific and technological goals while also ensuring societal benefits. However, Congress has yet to weigh in, and Senate Republicans have signaled that they want to establish a more technology-centered new directorate at NSF. So these competing views for the new directorate will likely play out in the upcoming conference between the House and Senate on legislation to enhance U.S. competitiveness in research and innovation. The conference committee was just announced, and we are lucky to have one member from the San Diego delegation that has been named to the committee, Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs. So this issue with, how the new directorate will play out is just one of a few kind of thorny issues that remain in play and will need to be addressed. Another issue that we're following very closely is the research community's concerns about onerous research security provisions that have been included in these bills on both the House and the Senate side. But overall, we are supportive of these significant, these bills that are going to make significant investments in science. And so we'll just continue to work with the congressional delegation, key members from San Diego and elsewhere, to really work on these on what we see as problems and push the legislation forward in a way that is beneficial to UC San Diego. So with that, I think I'm finished. So I will turn it back to SVC Continetti.
All right. Thank you, Executive Director Alpert, and thank you to all of our presenters today. Now it is time for the question and answer segment of this town hall. So at this time, I would like to invite all of our panelists to turn on their videos. During registration, attendees had an opportunity to submit questions for the panelists to answer. We have selected some of the most popular questions for the panel today. If you have questions now, as you have been during this town hall, please use the Q&A window to submit any additional questions during this session, and our panelists will do their best to provide answers. Due to time limitations, we may not be able to get to all the questions today. However, we're going to do our best to post the answers in the FAQ at returntolearn.ucsd.edu. So our first question of today, actually we have a couple of questions for you, Dr. Schooley, about boosters. Do you recommend that those who are eligible for an additional booster get vaccinated now?
That's a great question. It's one of the things that the CDC and the FDA advisory panels have been wrestling with. The reason they came up with a may receive an extra dose of vaccine now was because they didn't come to a consensus about whether one should come to a consensus to another vaccination now. Many on the panel felt that it was time to offer people who are over the age of 50 another vaccine dose, because what they saw was the level of protection in those who had had their third booster was declining. The level of protection was much greater in December than it was by March and now April, and that the trend suggested that over time, that level of protection from severe disease would continue to wane. Others said, well, it's not low enough now to really stampede everyone there, and some people may want to wait. I went ahead to show my hand and got my fourth dose about a week and a half ago, because I think that the safety of the vaccines is really quite good, and I'm over 60 and don't want to end up with what they're calling moderate to severe disease. It may not put me in the hospital, but people who've had this level of moderate to severe disease, many have felt pretty miserable. You've seen the kind of the big burst of BA2 cases around the Gridiron Dinner. And what's interesting about that is not many of them got very sick. And a lot of that is because most of them have had a booster. That was one of the things that happened pretty quickly for many of the people in Washington when this was authorized. So my general advice is that certainly people over 65, I'd have to think of a reason not to want to be boosted. Then people between 50 and 65, it gets to be more of an individualized decision. You can discuss that with your physician. If you have underlying conditions and your physician wants to discuss it with people in the ID division, we're happy to talk to people as well. But I think over time, more of us are going to need to get a booster, and it really boils down to a matter of timing.
Thank you. Related to that, what is your opinion about switching between Moderna and Pfizer for additional boosters?
There's one paper that was published about 10 days ago from Galit Alter's group. She's really a very talented immunologist from the Reagan Institute of MIT and Harvard Medical School, that suggests that people who get the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine develop antibodies that engage slightly different components of the immune response, of the immune effector response. And there's a theoretical reason that might be beneficial in terms of broadening the immunity. Having said that, the two vaccines induce such good protection in terms of the humoral response, and the cellular response is also quite potent. I think it's hard to make a case that that should be a recommendation. It's something that certainly people shouldn't worry about. If you go and you've had 3 Moderna vaccinations and they have the Pfizer vaccine that day, that's fine. But I wouldn't drive to Bakersfield to try to mix and match the vaccines based on the laboratory data we have so far. We don't have good clinical data yet about whether the laboratory data are meaningful.
Right, thank you. And one final question is, when do you think additional boosters might be authorized for other groups?
I think we'll be probably seeing broader recommendation for this in the fall. One of the things that people are waiting on is a decision about what the next booster should be. The virus has evolved substantially over the course of the last 2 years from the one that served as the model for the vaccines that are in use today. They were mainly modeled viruses that look much more like the Alpha strain than the Omicron strain. Having said that, when you begin to boost with that original looking vaccine spike, the immune response both increases in magnitude and it also broadens. So you get immune responses to the Omicron strain from that initial vaccine variant as you continue to expose the immune response to the same immunogen repeatedly. Some of the animal models suggest that if you vaccinate with the Omicron variant, you don't get back broadening against the previous variants. So people are trying to look at crystal ball and figure out what's going to be circulating in the fall. And the final consideration here is there is a lot of work going on to try to develop pan-coronavirus vaccines that are active against all variants. That work's very active. We don't have one yet, but I think some people are hoping that by fall we will. So some of the timing is based on our understanding of where the virus is going from its evolutionary perspective, how the protection from with the available vaccines that we have now translates to the viral evolution, and what progress is being made with pan-coronavirus variants. Against that backdrop, our immune responses are all declining every day. So we're going to have to make a decision at some point when to pull the trigger and recommend broad vaccination as fall and winter arrive, which is when we're most likely to see more viral activity.
Thank you. Lots of complicated questions still about this virus, obviously. The next question pertains to the vaccine mandate, and it's for Senior Director Winbush. It's two parts. Will an additional booster be mandatory for employees who are eligible? And are boosters mandatory for employees working 100% remotely? Director Winbush.
Thanks, Bob. So for the first question, at this time, the second booster is not a mandatory requirement of the vaccine mandate. Once a second booster is required for determination of being fully vaccinated, as that definition evolves, then it will likely be incorporated into the vaccine mandate, and then we will engage and let everyone know, give you advance notice so that you can make sure that all your information is uploaded and updated before we engage in any of our loving communications about that. For the second part, as it relates to whether boosters are mandatory for those who work 100% remotely, we get this question a lot, and I think that folks should understand that their definition of 100% remote isn't necessarily the organization's definition of 100% remote. So we have a process in place with our Vice Chancellor level HR contacts where they can, in consultation with the VC, make a determination as to whether a person is what we consider a never ever, meaning you are never ever expected to come to UC San Diego. And if you meet the criteria that we have defined, then you go on to a lovely little list, and then your name gets loaded into our supervisor dashboard and our HR central dashboard as someone who's a never ever and actually shows up in a different compliance category. And so therefore you're not going to be reached out to regarding the vaccine mandate. So there's a process and there's a structure. It may not meet the definition of what some of you individually feel as though that you're a 100% remote worker, but work with your HR contact and they can help explain to you that process and whether or not you qualify.
Thank you. The next question goes to ABC Rawlins. With the record number of undergraduate applications this year, when will departments know how many students were admitted and accepted into their programs?
It's a great question, and whoever asked that, thanks so much for bringing it up. It's It's a careful balance we're going to try to always bring to this from enrollment management. And for those of you that don't know, I'm fairly new to campus. So regardless of what might or might not be done in past years, we're going to do everything we can this year to make sure we're getting helpful information out to you at the right times about questions like how many students are coming into which departments. One of the things we've already been doing with that this year is making sure that the deans and provosts got information about which applicants were requesting their particular areas of campus once the application information became final. As we move through the stage of offering admission, and again, we're not quite done with that yet, we're going to continue that practice of sharing that with the deans and provosts and other key folks on campus. We're going to want to tell you as soon as we can what to expect for the fall, but it's also important that everyone remember that metaphor I used a little earlier. If you imagine the good old hurricane map, where when you see something forming off in the distance, you can tell where it's going to be pretty well a short distance out. And the farther away you get, the less you can predict exactly where things are going to go. When we remind you that we're talking about this with thousands of 17-year-olds at a time, we could easily tell you things early that won't be worth much at all. So we're going to try to find that sweet spot as we get into May and June in particular, with both the first year and the transfer students. Keep in mind that while we don't admit students to the university based on something like the college they selected, and to some extent really not the major they're after, at least with our first year students, there are some reasons that we even have wait lists within our admit pool. So some of the capped and other very selective and impacted majors, we're going to try to do steps where we may admit a student to the university, but not to their first choice major, just as we do with colleges. And so there'll be some sorting out as we go through these next couple of months to see who does and doesn't accept our offer, how that plays into some of the initial decisions we've made. Sometimes a student who's already been admitted to the university will get notification that we've been able to put them in the major they wanted more, or that something changed about the college they're going to be in. So all of that's going to be working over these next couple of months. We will continue to work through the deans and provosts as kind of our way to more of you around campus to share that information in the places they know best at the right time. And you're always welcome to reach out to us, but you need to realize sometimes our answer will be, we don't know yet. Either way, we'll love to hear from you. Thanks.
Thank you. The next question goes to Vice Chancellor Piquesa. Are sponsors of research and/or clinical trials being conducted at UC San Diego now permitted to come to UC San Diego facilities to perform monitoring, or must the study monitoring activities continue to be performed remotely?
So sponsors of research that are monitoring participants, which are primarily going to be clinical trials, are allowed to do so on site. However, they must follow all of the COVID protocols. And so, for example, one of the areas that we do still require masks are clinical settings, as well as in educational and transportation settings. So that would have to happen. And also any special safety protocols that are written into the agreement would need to be followed as well. However, it's not required that we go back to in-person monitoring. There can still be requests to access the medical record for sponsor monitoring. I will type that email into the chat.
All right, thank you. The next questions go to Senior Director Winbush, and they regard hybrid and remote work. What is the campus expectation regarding staff returning to on-site work, and when? That's the first question. The second one, do you anticipate that the university will continue to offer hybrid work options for employees post-pandemic as a retention strategy?
So I'll take the second part first, Bob. I want to reframe that and say that hybrid work and flexible function of a retention strategy, but more a function of being an employer of choice for now and forever, as we currently are. And so I think that to the extent that it makes sense for the type of work that's being done, the operations and the nature of the work that we support, we will continue to offer flexibility to our employees. That being said, and to that first question, as was noted earlier in the presentation, I think Miroslav said it, about the expectation is that employees are required to come back on site to engage in work that is required to be done on site. And so for those who, sort of use the pandemic as the reason why they couldn't come on site, as Chip so eloquently shared with us through these presentations, our numbers are so great right now. And it's really just about doing what's right and return on site and enjoy the vibrance of the campus, seeing the students on site, engaging in that lab work, engaging in that instruction and those chance encounters that you get to see some colleagues across campus and getting yogurt. You all know that's my favorite. And spending that time. But yes, employees, based on the type of work that they're doing and their client base, et cetera, are being expected to return on site. That's all differentiated by the different working units and departments and VC areas. So really listen to your supervisor, engage in having those conversations with your supervisor. And to the extent that you have some flexibility now that you want to change or you feel a need to change to better operations, have that conversation with your supervisors and your employees as well, because it's all about continuous improvement and being flexible continually as we go forward and continue to be that employer of choice.
Thank you. The next question goes to Dr. Schooley. What level of increase in COVID-19 signal in the wastewater would be likely to trigger a change in masking protocol here at UC San Diego?
Another great question. We and UCSD Health have been looking at historical data to try to decide what the how to define the baseline in the most objective way, and then how to define a change in baseline. And what we are looking at is really using it as one of several different components that would be made to decide about changes in any number of mitigation decisions. And in my view, it would not just be a change above a certain threshold, but it will also have to do with trajectory. We also are thinking about and repetitive measures, because there's quite a bit of, as you may have seen in the numbers, there's quite a bit of variation from day to day. And if you set a threshold of, say, 2 million copies, you might be in a green zone one day and a yellow zone the next day, and then back in green the next. And so we really look at this from the standpoint of the totality of the data and look at trends. But it's going to be a really important indicator and one of the things that we'll be looking at. As you've probably seen, some colleges on the East Coast are beginning to recommend remasking. Philadelphia has suggested, has returned to masking mandate indoor. I don't think we're there in San Diego, but we may get there sometime in the next several months if BA2 moves out here. And we'll be looking at all the parameters that many of the parameters we talked about today to be able to make these recommendations and try to operate with as few restrictions as possible for as long as we can, but still keep our eyes open for trends that we need to respond to.
Thank you. The next question goes to ABC Jensen. Current guidelines state that masking remains required in all indoor classroom and instructional settings, clinical areas, and on university transportation until further notice. Are office hours considered instructional settings?
That's a great question. And it really depends on the kinds of office hours. So if it's office hours tied to a class, the policy says instructional settings, in which case the answer is yes, masking is required. If you have office hours for your research students or for your lab or for other things, that's more of a gray area and you can use discretion. But for office hours associated with a class, yes.
Thank you for that clarification. The next question goes to EBC Simmons. What do we expect fall quarter to look like?
Well, as Dr. Schooley said, the word expect is a little hard to deal with nowadays. What I hope that the fall will look like is this spring quarter, only more so, with an extended period where we can really be fully in person and we can continue to relax the various safety protocols that we have needed up to this time so that we can have a greater sense of freedom and community building and so on. That is what I hope for. And we're going to have to watch the data every day as we continue to do out of an abundance of caution. But I hope that's what we'll see.
All right, thank you for that. The next question is back to you, ABC Jensen, and it pertains to the masking mandate for instruction. Some instructors have expressed concerns that their lectures aren't being heard easily by students while they are masked. What resources are available to assist instructors with voice amplification in the classrooms?
So all of our general assignment classrooms are equipped with voice amplification equipment, and Educational Technology Services will provide free lapel mics, personal lapel mics for anyone teaching in one of those classrooms. Many of the department scheduled spaces are equipped that way as well, but not all. In the case of smaller classrooms, this shouldn't be as big of an issue there. We do have some portable units that instructors can check out for the term and get help. So we'll post a link in the chat to how to get in touch with Educational Technology Services. They are happy to engage in a consultation with any of our faculty or TAs and find a solution.
Thank you, Carlos. The next question is for Senior Director Winbush. With inflation and the cost of living on the rise, is the University of California considering a cost of living adjustment for employees this year?
So there's a couple parts to that answer. The first part is to remember that there are certain different populations of employees. So whether we're talking about faculty, whether we're talking about staff, or we're talking about represented or non-represented in those groups will impact the answer. The short answer is for policy covered staff. That the president is looking at a salary program, but it has not yet been approved at this point. And that salary program, as in prior years, has always taken into account the things that are going on in the world. So I say that to say, once we know more information, we will share it out with everyone broadly and what the eligibility and criteria, et cetera, will be required for that. For our represented folks, they can just look to their collective bargaining agreements to let them know what is on the horizon for them, because those are negotiated system-wide and lay out what is to come during the duration of that agreement. So there are, it depends on the population you're asking about, but there, as soon as we have more information as it relates to our policy covered staff, we will be sharing that out for our employees.
Thank you. Thank you. The last question for today is a question for EVC Simmons. May a faculty member request an accommodation through the interactive process with disability counseling and consulting, DCC, that permits them to ask that people mask in their offices?
Thanks very much, Bob. So this is a question that has a slightly extended answer. First, if a faculty member has specific medical circumstances which may require reasonable accommodations, then they may reach out to, for example, through email to hrdcc@ucsd.edu, and a disability counselor will be assigned to work with them and go through the interactive process with them. I do encourage anybody who feels more comfortable continuing to wear a mask anywhere, anytime, please do so. That is one of the easiest and most effective ways to reduce the spread of the virus. And everybody should recognize that others may wish to wear a mask, and we should all respect everybody's right to wear a mask if they would like to do so. And finally, I do want to encourage people to use some of the nice signage that was developed actually by AVC Rawlins's department, that allows you to politely and cheerfully indicate your own personal masking practices to others, so they will know what to expect you to be doing when they walk into your office. And I think the link, there you go, the link is in the chat. So kind of an extended answer, basically, yes, a person may reach out to DCC to go through the process. I can't guarantee, of course, what the outcome will be in any, because that's highly dependent on particular circumstances, but their wish to explore this through the interactive process will be taken very seriously. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, EVC Simmons. So we've had an extended question and answer period today, and I think we're going to draw this to a close. I want to thank everybody for their questions today. There are additional questions, though, and we will do our best to answer those by updating the FAQ that is on the Return to Learn website. and posting a recording of today's town hall as well. So I'd like to thank the presenters and guests for sharing their time and information with us today. And I thank you, the faculty and researchers of UC San Diego, for attending and joining us. Working together as a community to help bring us through these unprecedented times. We had more than 330 attendees today, and these town halls are an important part of how we have stayed united as a community. To help improve them, we encourage you to complete the post-event survey that you will be sent shortly to help us continue to refine our communications to our campus community. The next town hall for staff is on the display here. It's on Thursday, April 28th, and you can visit the Return to Learn website to register as shown in the chat. This concludes today's Return to Learn Faculty and Research Town Hall. So thank you, take care, stay safe, and I hope to see all of you again here on campus very soon. Thank you.